Hello, and welcome to Supporting Students with Disabilities to Ensure Post-Secondary Readiness and Success. My name is Adam Hartwell, and I work for the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority. Today, alongside Jenna Shales from Bridgewater State University and Sarah Parker from Wentworth Institute of Technology, we will be hoping to help you learn how to involve parents in transition planning. We'll be talking to you about the ABLE accounts, which are savings accounts that can be helpful for students with disabilities to help with college and other life expenses, such as assistive technology, and hear from our two educators who have had success with this work and who will share strategies and experiences in preparing students with disabilities for life after high school. The Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority is a state authority created in 1982 to help families plan, save, and pay for college and reach financial goals. So what is the ABLE Act? The Stephen Beck Jr. Achieving a Better Life Experience, or ABLE Act, amended the federal tax code in 2014 to add Section 529A. This is very similar to 529 plans. This legislation established ABLE accounts, tax-exempt accounts for eligible individuals with disabilities to be used for qualified disability expenses, while still keeping eligibility for federal public benefits. In Massachusetts, accounts from the ABLE Act are called Attainable Savings Plan accounts. The Attainable Savings Plan was launched in 2017. MEFA is the state sponsor and Fidelity Investments is the program manager. Fidelity has trained a specialized division to assist individuals with setting up and answering questions regarding their attainable accounts. Attainable Savings Plan accounts can benefit a student going into either college or other paths post-high school. Attainable funds can be used for tuition and to help college life more inclusive. Specifically, attainable accounts can be used to pay for anything relating to health, housing, education, transportation, assistive technology or assistive technology support, employment training and support, and personal support services, as well as basic living needs. Due to lack of inclusive systems, individuals with disabilities often incur extra expenses, things like certain types of hotel rooms being needed, vehicles with accommodations, ramps, assistive technology for communication or safety. Transition planning for adulthood under the IDEA begins at age 14. For many, it should begin at birth. Attainable provides the opportunity to invest and potentially grow savings. As an example, using a 6% of return and $100 a month saved for 22 years, saved in a jar that would be about $26,400. In an attainable account, it would be closer to $54,000. If the account was opened at age 14, saved in a jar $9,600, or in an attainable account $12,000. The investment growth is one of the great benefits of an attainable account. Attainable funds can be used for housing and transportation, medical expenses, college or vocational trainings, and so much more that can make someone's life so much easier. Individuals are eligible for an attainable account if the onset of disability occurred before age 26, this will go up to age 46 in the year 2026, and the individual is eligible to receive SSI or SSDI due to their disability or self-certifies as meeting requirements. This requires a diagnosis with functional limitations such as those in the Social Security Administration's Blue Book or their Compassionate Allowances conditions. I've listed some here, but there is in fact a wide variety that apply, from mental health challenges to long-term cancer recovery. There are many things that would qualify an individual to receive an attainable account, and I highly recommend people look into that for their benefit. To get into some attainable account specifics, these accounts allow account owners or beneficiaries to save over $2,000 without affecting federal benefits. SSI is not suspended until the account exceeds $100,000. Anyone can contribute to the account, including friends and families, and beneficiaries have immediate access to their funds. These funds have multiple tax benefits. In the year 2023, contribution limits have increased. The total max annual contribution at this point is $17,000. If employed, the beneficiary may contribute an additional $13,590 each year from earnings due to the Able to Work Act. The maximum account balance cannot exceed $500,000. There is no annual account maintenance fee. Attainable accounts are investment accounts, and therefore they have investment fees which vary based on your portfolio, but tend to range between 0.57% and 0.94%. Due to the ABLE Financial Planning Act, Provided that the beneficiary is the same individual on both accounts, or one beneficiary is a family member of the other, it is allowable to transfer funds from a 529 college savings plan into an ABLE account without incurring any tax or penalty. ABLE account owners who meet certain criteria can also receive a saver's credit on their federal taxes for contributions into an ABLE account. Individuals are eligible if they are age 18 or older, not a full-time student, and not claimed as a dependent on another person's tax return. As long as withdrawals are spent on a qualified disability expense, attainable account growth is federal income tax-free. Visit fidelity.com/able if you are interested in opening an account. You can review our disclosure documents, which include a lot more information on the things that I've discussed briefly here today, and also decide how to allocate funds in the account among the 8 portfolio options that are available for attainable accounts. Those account options can be switched between twice per year. Thank you so much for your time as I turn your attention now to my fellow presenters.
Hi, my name is Jenna Shales, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the Director of Student Accessibility Services at Bridgewater State University.
Hi, my name is Sarah Parker. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the Assistant Director of Student Accessibility Services at Wentworth Institute of Technology.
We're absolutely thrilled to join you today and to continue the discussion that Adam started. We're taking it in a little bit of a different direction, looking at how you as school counselors are going to help students transition plan for a meaningful college experience. So in this exact moment in time, chances are you are very aware of the high school transition laws, right? Those that relate to the work that you're actively doing with students that are planning to transition to college specifically, or other aspects of life, right? So the presentation that we're about to do focuses solely on those that are coming to college. So when you're starting to look at that Chapter 205 transition planning, that's where you're going to address that post-secondary vision. What are they going to do? How are you going to expand upon that in a way that is meaningful for the student and really benefits them as far as getting into that next step of their educational career? The secondary to post-secondary laws are where things really change, and this may be where you might not be quite as familiar. So K through 12, you've got the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, right? And that guarantees all students a free, appropriate public education. And it needs to be in the least restrictive environment, right? Evaluation and intervention is primarily initiated by the school system. So the school system is responsible for kind of looking out for and identifying students that may need those additional supports. And the school system is primarily responsible for providing those supports. Parents, guardians, those are generally the ongoing advocates for the student. Personal aids that are required are provided by the school district, as well as personal services. And really the school is geared towards modifying the student's academic experience so that they can achieve success and basically move successfully through that K through 12 experience. Then towards the end of that career, once a student graduates, they are now no longer falling under IDEA. And there are 3 big chunks of laws that I think are primarily what's going to impact their experience. So first is the Americans with Disabilities Act as amended. Now that does apply to students in K through 12, but this becomes that first and foremost factor. There's also Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which again applies in K through 12, but there's a different section of it that applies in the college arena, right? And Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, that's FERPA. It does exist in the K through 12, but changes dramatically when a student comes to college. So the core things to know about this, at least at this stage, is that students have to be otherwise qualified to be a fully matriculated or degree-seeking student, and they're held to the same expectations as their non-disabled peers. Reasonable accommodations have to be requested by the student in a student-led interactive process. Accommodations cannot fundamentally alter the nature of the program. Personal aids and services, as I mentioned before, are actually the student's responsibility, and the school experience may involve accommodations to promote access, not necessarily a guarantee of success. So that sounds like a lot, right? It's a bit to take in. So Sarah and I are going to break it down into these 6 categories and walk you through what each one means and how you, as a counselor, can assist students in preparing for this part of their experience. So first noteworthy difference that we highlighted, student-led, self-directed. Second, the parent involvement at the student's end and the college's discretion, very different. Third, accommodations are for access, not a guarantee of success. 4, there are the same performance and behavioral expectations for everybody. 5, personal aids and equipment are provided by the student. And 6, multiple living and learning experiences may be addressed. We'll get to it. Take it away. It's me. So student-led, self-directed, here we go. This is a big one. Students have to self-identify and initiate a request for disability or accessibility services throughout the designated office. We're going to refer to student accessibility services a lot because that happens to be the name of both of our offices. But you may find at other schools it's called disability resources, disability services, Office of Access and Disability. It really varies. Students have to provide required documentation that supports their request. And again, we'll give you more information on that. Students have to actively participate in the interactive process by discussing their diagnosis, the impact that they experience, and possible accommodations. Students also have to distribute letters of accommodation and should discuss implementation with their instructors or other relevant parties. And students must communicate that they need help, they must connect with the appropriate resources, and they have to participate in the appropriate follow-up. These are all really big differences for a lot of students just entering college, especially those with disabilities. So it's important to start looking for opportunities to enhance these skill areas now.
Right, so these are some, tips that we thought we would share. One would be have students taking a leading role in their IEP meeting. At least definitely attending their IEP meeting is going to be really important for them to then be able to advocate for themselves and have a similar conversation when they get to college. Ensure students know their diagnosis and are prepared, like I said, to have those conversations and speak to how their diagnosis impacts them. Help students develop college-level communication skills and strategies for identifying and requesting supports at college, which we're going to talk a little bit more about as well. And promote the independent problem solving and follow-up whenever possible, like really helping students, again, gain those skills that they are able to then advocate for themselves independently when they get to college.
And just to jump in here real quick, some of this may sound a little bit silly, like of course a student's going to know their diagnosis. You would be surprised by how many students don't, right? So part of what we do is a full interactive process with the student where we talk to them, we get a better understanding of what their experience is, how they project or feel they might experience their academics and other aspects of the university. And a key factor in that is having common language, which includes the diagnosis. A lot of students come to us and they say, oh, I don't know my diagnosis, I have an IEP. So that's a really basic but strong place to start from.
And documentation is a key piece in this process as well. Documentation will be required from pretty much every institution you go to. And we get a lot of questions about what is that documentation? What do I need? Colleges have different documentation requirements and they vary from college to college. So what I would say is to really just go to that university website and see what they have listed as requirements. For the most part, it's going to need to be recent, probably within 3 years, but it may be different depending on the diagnosis. But we looking for information on how it impacts the student.
And the reason that that's really important, oh, I'm sorry, Sarah.
No, go ahead.
The reason that that's really important is because, as we just noted, sometimes the students don't have a full understanding of or the full skill set to communicate about their diagnosis, right? So we basically use a 3-pronged approach to implementing and identifying accommodations and figuring out what's most important and what is appropriate. And those 3 prongs are that interaction with the student, right? Our own professional observations, and supporting diagnostic documentation.
So another tip that we thought of is really important. I would recommend sending the documentation to the Student Accessibility Services office, whether that's going to be you as the counselor or the student themselves or their family. Lots of times I meet with students and they say, oh, my stuff got sent over to Wentworth, but I don't know what that means. I don't know where that went. Sometimes it's like tracking that down. That may have gone to admissions, and not that it would affect anything with their admission to the college. It has nothing to do with that, but just sometimes it takes a little bit more time to track down that documentation so that we are then able to have that conversation and move forward with accommodations. So I would say make sure that's submitted directly to the office that is requesting them. And I would also recommend giving the student a copy of their IEP or their 504 plan, their testing, whatever that may be. I meet with a lot of students, maybe second semester, freshman year, that want to get connected with our office. And it takes a little bit of time for them to then, call back their high school, wait for someone to send that over. So if they have a copy of their own plan, it really enables them to be in control of that and get that process taken care of.
This is also a great opportunity to have the student themselves get used to that self-initiation practice, and they can send their information directly to the appropriate office at each institution. And here we are, parent involvement, my favorite topic. So as I mentioned originally, parents are pretty much the primary advocate for students in the K through 12 experience. As a parent of a kiddo with a disability, I know how much effort I have put into making sure that she has a truly equitable experience academically so far. And she is only 6 and I'm already exhausted. So by the time somebody gets to the end of 12th grade, right, parents probably have this down and they are ready to go at another system, right? However, that looks a lot different. And that's because the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act takes what was rights to the student's educational records given to the family, the guardian, the parent, right? And it moves those rights over to the student themselves when they turn 18 or upon entering college. So now all of that information is at the hands of the student and not the parent, guardian, family advocate. There are, of course, ways to get that information. Students are welcome to complete a FERPA authorization or something equivalent at any institution. It has to be signed by the student for a specific information type to be shared to a specific person, and it can be revoked at any time, right? And that would give access to whatever specific education records the student says. Education records include academic progress, grade reports, financial aid information, bill status, information about residence life, what student activity records they have, disciplinary actions, and accommodations. So if that is something that you know that your student that you're working with and or their family guardian are going to want to have a clear kind of common understanding of, that's a really good conversation to start sooner than later, right? Because navigating what that looks like is pretty critical.
So again, some tips, thinking about FERPA, share resources to help inform students and parents about their rights and the shift in responsibility. Really just address that this is coming, and so that you can start helping those students have that conversation. Second one, guide discussion between students and parents to explore expectations for sharing information in the college setting, and help students obtain that documentation, fill out that FERPA form at the beginning. So yeah, like I said, it's important to just kind of address that this is coming. Know that we are understanding at first, when students and their families reach out at the beginning, and the parents may need to be involved to help get that documentation to us. But really, once they're a student, our offices are not going to be talking with the parents without the student there and without their explicit permission.
Yeah, I know in our office, we have a really big commitment to the idea of nothing about us without us. So it is pretty darn rare for us to have a conversation about a student, even with a FERPA authorization on file, without that student being involved in that conversation. So we talked about accommodations being for access. This is a really tricky one for a lot of folks. So I'm going to refer to the graphic down below. On the leftmost portion of your screen, you will see 3 individuals attempting to write on a chalkboard. Person on the left is a little bit shorter, but they can reach the chalkboard. They can probably write in some of it, definitely not all of it. The person in the middle, they're relatively tall. They haven't even reached their arm up all the way yet. So they're probably going to be able to access that chalkboard just fine. The third person in is sitting on a walker and they can't access that chalkboard at all. So that is a problem, right? You can address that access issue through accommodation, right? Which would be that next screen there. So the middle graphic, the person that's a bit shorter now has a box to stand on, they're lifted up. They have about the same kind of chalkboard space experience as that person in the middle who is a bit taller. And the person on the right who is sitting on the walker now has a ramp and a platform, same thing. Ultimately, with those accommodations, their experience is now equitable, right? However, what we're aiming for is total equity, which in this case is achieved by a bigger chalkboard, hung a bit lower. Now accommodations aren't needed, but they all have an equitable experience. The purpose of this is to show that instead of in that first frame saying, oh, person who's sitting on the walker, you actually don't have to write on the chalkboard. We'll excuse you from that part of the assignment. The expectation is still that the person writes on the chalkboard and the accommodation gives them the access to be able to do so. That's how we frame accommodations in the college environment, right? It's to provide the student an equitable college experience. Really important to note, accommodations should not cost additional money or fees, right? They do not change the expectations of the student's performance. That would be a modification, right? So that's the part where I said, you know, if we excuse the student in that first frame from having to do the chalkboard assignment at all, that would be a modification. That's not going to happen in a college environment, right? Just because accommodations are approved doesn't mean that the student is actively using them. They have to choose to use their accommodations and they have to communicate about those accommodations. And as I mentioned previously, accommodations can't alter the fundamental components of a course, program, or experience.
Okay, some tips, some things to consider about accommodations. Reduce the reliance on material provided by others and enhance skills for students to create their own versions. So this would be getting a study guide ahead of time, getting a copy of someone else's notes, outlines. We really want to really enable that student to be independent and get those skills so that they can be successful on their own without relying on others. Help identify available supplemental resources at their institution. We'll talk about that a little bit more as this goes on, but take advantage of those academic supports that are on campus, the tutoring, counseling services, things like that, that will be available to them. So this is an important piece, and Jenna talked about this already a little bit, but reduce the use of modifications or other approaches that change the expectations or standards the student is held to. So here are some examples here about no homework, shorter writing assignment, but an example might be, so if a student in a class has an exam with 100 questions, we wouldn't modify that to say the student can only answer 50 questions. What we would do is, again, depending on the student and their accommodation, they would have to be held to those 100 questions, but they might have more time to complete those questions, things like that. So yeah, it's really important to think about that transition from modifications to appropriate accommodations. And we really wouldn't recommend moving a student from an IEP to a 504 plan because it carries over. Does not automatically carry over. Students will really have to come in and meet with us and go through that process, submit their documentation, have a meeting with us, talk about the barriers that they feel like they might be coming against. And then the accommodations are made. I meet with a lot of students who come in and say, oh, I have this thing, I already have extended time. But if that's not approved through our office or have that accommodation letter through our office, it's not going to be implemented. And like I said before, it's not going to impact the admissions.
Yeah, we hear a lot of times from family members that they were recommended that they switch their student from an IEP to a 504 as they neared the college experience. And there's really a big kind of misconception out there about that. So anytime Sarah and I have the chance to say, don't do it, don't do it, right? It's not necessary,
Right.
at least not in terms of getting into or being successful at college. So performance and behavioral expectations, those can vary greatly between high school and college as well. So the first thing that I like to think about is the coursework, right? I know that for a lot of folks, there is a bit of shock when you look at your first syllabus, right? You see that the volume of the coursework is significantly increased, right? And there's this expectation of independent study. So there are going to be materials that you will be assessed on that are never discussed in class, right? Videos that you have to watch, articles you have to read. So you've got to be able to do that independently. And that takes a lot of time. The general kind of recommended ratio there is to plan on studying for 2 to 3 hours for every 1 credit of a course. Most classes are 3 credits, so that would be 9 hours probably studying. And if you're somebody who has a disability that's impacting aspects of studying, like reading, writing, taking notes, comprehension, that may be more than 9 hours, right? So that's a big thing to contend with, especially because it's really self-directed. And then you've got to balance all of that time with your academic focus with other aspects of college, right? Friends, sports, extracurricular activities, clubs, having a social life, sleeping. I hear people value sleeping sometimes, right?
What?
It's important. I know. So it's a really big shift. The other big shift is the assessments, right? So passing as a whole, getting a passing grade in a class is probably not going to be a D. There might be some classes that are considered passing with a D, but especially if it's in your program of study, at least at Bridgewater, you need at least a C or sometimes a B to move forward in a series of classes. The other big thing with assessments is, they're normally done as exams or papers or projects, which means that they are less frequent and therefore more comprehensive. So instead of a weekly quiz, you might have 2 big exams in the semester, and that's it. You'll also see that it is more based on evidencing that you've mastered or you're able to apply the information that's been presented in class and that you've learned throughout the class, as opposed to just memorization. And that can be really hard for many students, regardless of ability, to adjust to. The actual concept of grades is also pretty different. I know, in K through 12, there's often opportunities for makeup work. College, university level does not really happen at all, or not often at least. Graded assignments could be weighted very differently. So that's a really big one to keep in mind. Not everybody understands how that works. And even if they do understand how the weighting system goes, it's a hard thing sometimes to keep track of independently, and you may have to do that. And then there's also a lack of immediate feedback. I think we're all getting used to functioning in K through 12 with portals that have notes from faculty and instant grades or semi-instant grades, right? That may not be your experience in college. And so you've got to be able to really gauge your own progress and get comfortable checking in with faculty. So as a counselor, that's something to definitely keep in mind. And then the really big thing is citizenship, right? There are the same community expectations for everyone within the campus community, regardless of diagnosis, how it's impactful. Having a disability does not excuse or alter expectations at all. And for some of the students that have arrived at colleges in the last few years, that's a pretty big surprise to them. Then I'm going to also dive into personal aids and equipment. So there are things called auxiliary aids, right? And auxiliary services. And those are necessary to make sure, again, that there's that equal opportunity to participate in and enjoy the benefits of service, program, activity, experience, whatever, right? So those are things that the university is going to provide as an accommodation. Now, there's details about this that are subject to interpretation, right? And customized based on the individual needs of the student, the university itself, et cetera. But something like getting digital versions of print books, that's going to be provided by the university, right? The student has to buy the print book because that's what everybody else has to do too, right? But if they need a digital version of it, the school can normally help with that. If the student needs an ASL interpreter, that's something that the university would provide. And going back a few slides, it said accommodation should not cost the student extra money. This is an example of something where the school is going to take the cost of that, right? For classes and the academic experience. There's some other ones listed on there. Lighted alarms for the residence hall. If you have a student that's deaf or hard of hearing and they need bed shakers, alarm lights, doorbell lights, that can be provided upon request and if appropriate by the university as well, right? So again, the university should provide those at no additional cost to the student. Where the line is drawn though, and it gets really confusing here, are with personal attendance and individually prescribed devices. For example, hearing aids, right? Hearing aids themselves are specifically for the student themselves, right? That would be a personal device. An FM system, right, that integrates with their hearing aids, that might be considered an auxiliary aid, right? A reader for personal use, right? You just want to go hang out somewhere in town and you need somebody to read free. That's probably not going to happen, right? That would be something that you would need to provide yourself. A lot of students are really comfortable having one-on-one behavioral health supports in school in the K through 12 environment. The universities will not be providing those as a reasonable accommodation, nor will they provide hygiene assistants, right, PCAs. So those are things to start looking at as well, because that would be on the student themselves to provide those if required.
Okay, so some tips around personal aids and auxiliary aids. Identify what tools, resources, and supports the students rely on. Just think about and determine if these are going to be provided by the student or by the university. And if they're not going to be provided, how are you going to acquire those tools and supports? You can consider mass rehab, different programs. The ABLE savings plan might be a great option for you to consider. If there's something like that you might need to have an expense around. And if it is provided by the university, what information will be needed to support and inform the request? So yeah, we really just encourage you to, put some time and think about what the student may need and how is that going to be set up for them.
So far, we've focused primarily on kind of that academic side of the experience, but for a lot of students, college is about far more than just academics, right? There's still some aspects in academics that are important that we haven't mentioned. I would say the class style is very important. The modality, will classes be in person? Will they be online, right? Class styles, are they going to be lecture heavy, reading heavy, writing heavy? Flipped classroom, that's a whole thing. Are your students prepared for that? Because they might wind up in one of those. And then, figuring out what their specific interests are as far as classes goes, that can make the academic experience a lot more fun, right? That social idea, making friends, joining clubs, sports, and other activities, getting ahead on looking into what options are available for them, but also figuring out if any accommodations are going to be needed in those areas. Executive function needs and skills. So we talked a lot about that time management and balancing multiple, if not competing priorities. That's what that falls under. So that's another thing to start assessing with your students. Is there room to grow in this area? What skills do they need to develop? Traveling to, from, and around the campus community. That is a huge factor. Some campuses are far easier to navigate physically than others. So if that is a challenge area for your student, you want to make sure you're having conversations about that. There's also, some communities that are far more accessible outside of campus than others. So don't forget that life happens off campus too sometimes. Dining, especially if a student's going to be living on campus. If a student has food allergies or aversions, sensitivities, you want to make sure that they are making an informed decision about their dining options. And if they're going to need accommodations in that area, that they get on top of that sooner than later. Wellness and self-care needs and skills. This is huge, right? The big shift from K through 12, where you have people checking in on you, and chances are you're living with other folks who are kind of monitoring how you're doing, right? And there's a second set of eyes, so to speak, on you and how you are evidencing that you are doing okay or not, right? And then getting that follow-up support if you're not. It's on the student, right? There are people around, but the students gotta also take a leading role in that. So this is a huge area to skill build in preparation for college. Then, the decision to live on campus, live off campus, live alone with other people, that's a big one, right? Developing appropriate communication skills, and we've said it before, self-advocacy, that is critical. And then that other essential resources. What is it that the student relies on in that K through 12 environment to be successful? Is there a particular technology? Is there a particular place that they like to hang out? Is there a particular person, right? And how are they going to fulfill that need when they come to college? Having those conversations sooner than later can be absolutely wonderful in terms of preparing the student for that college transition.
Yeah, these are all really important things to start thinking about ahead of that transition. And some other, again, like we talked about, some other resources, students with disabilities may need to consider more factors and their non-disabled peers when identifying what college or university they'd like to attend. So again, these are just some things that you want to think about that the student should be thinking about when looking at a college. The Student Accessibility Services Office, is that its own office? Is that our accommodations held within another department? What's the academic support look like? Is there one-to-one tutoring, and is there drop-in support that I can have? Is there a testing center that I can take my tests in? What's the wellness center like? Do they provide counseling? What's the student support look like? If I do realize I do need some more support in another aspect of my college experience, where can I get that? Peer mentoring, that's a really great tool. Is that available at the school I'm looking at? And then again, some other things to think about. How big is the school? What are the class size like? Housing configuration came to mind. Wentworth, we pretty much only have suite style housing. Is that something that's going to suit you? Co-op, are you looking to go into the workforce for a little bit while you're on campus? Is that something that interests you? Semester versus trimester. Some trimesters you're going to have to be in school during the summer. Does that work for you? Does that help you stay on track and, stay in a routine? Or do you really need that break over the summer? Cost, of course, degree type, all things that students should really be considering when looking at different options. So we talked about, again, these resources that are on campus. At Wentworth, we have the Success Studio. So we're a department that encompasses accessibility services, academic support, and academic advising. So we're all housed together in the library. So we're really accessible to students that can pop up and come see us. We really provide that holistic support to a student, that a student can come in and get connected with us, and we can address all types of things that they're going through and address them through our office, or we work very closely and collaborate with, again, those offices that I mentioned that we're connected with, but also throughout campus. We also provide a lot of programming of things that we talked about, like executive functioning, note-taking, time management, things like that. So at Wentworth, the Success Studio is a part of those other resources.
So similarly, at Bridgewater State University, We have the Academic Achievement Center, which has 5 unique areas within it. We have testing services, which does community testing, placement testing for new students, and also proctored testing for students that require accommodations. We have certain academic advising that happens here. We have learning assistance, which is both tutoring and that coaching in the relation to executive function skills, student accessibility services, and transfer services. For the most part, these services are all currently housed in the library. So again, that kind of one-stop shop feel. But student accessibility services is actually going to be moving to our student union in the near future. The reason for that is we feel very strongly that disability culture is in fact a culture, and so having us be at the heart of the student experience is very symbolic and meaningful, and provides that much more kind of advocacy, accessibility, and pride for the students at BSU. We also partner hugely with a ton of other divisions and departments across campus, such as the Wellness Center, Pride Center, Student Navigators, which actually pair up one-on-one with students to help them kind of find their way through college. We work closely with military and veteran student services, res life and housing, and all sorts of other areas. On top of that, you will see that we have a variety of programs that we offer directly through student accessibility services. So the reason I'm showing this slide is because I think you can learn a lot about how a accessibility services department, right, and community feels based on how they, present themselves, right? So these are just a few of the ways that student accessibility communicates and reaches out to the students on our campus. You can see that we are, I would say, advocacy driven. We really want to make sure that all throughout the university experience, folks with disabilities are having that equitable experience to that of their peers, right? And on the next slide, you can see some of the events that we specifically host. We do have that peer mentor program that Sarah mentioned before. We have Access Advocates, which is a 5-week kind of service learning project that we do with students on a volunteer basis, of course. We have Be Seen, which is a really fun thing that we do twice a year. We just started that recently, but it's a visual demonstration of our support for students with disabilities or community members with disabilities across the campus, and tons of other events. So if those are things that are important to the students that you're working with, make sure that you're looking right on the school's websites, on the tours, on the accepted students days for signs that this is what's occurring, right? And if this is not for your student, that's okay too, right? Find the thing that matches well for them.
So those are some programs and stuff that we mentioned that are available at the schools that Jen and I both work at. And that's pretty much every school you go to is gonna have, again, as we learn, this is guided by the law that students are can have those accommodations, but there's other programs that have different offerings. Again, what's gonna fit your unique student is going to be different. So there are institutions specifically designed for students with disabilities, like Landmark College and Beacon College. Those are some schools that, like I said, are specifically designed for students with disabilities. There's also institutions nearby that have specific programs designed for students with disabilities. And some of those may have separate application processes, like they may apply to be a part of the learning disability program. There also may be additional expenses to be a part of that program and expenses for those additional supports. But here are some examples, again, like at Dean College, they have the ARC program. I know Westfield State has learning disabilities program, Northeastern does, Curry. So those are some schools that have additional academic programming and supports for students with disabilities. And there's also institutions that have the private pay programs, like Excel at Bridgewater State University. Jen, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. So this is where folks go, wait a minute, I thought you said that accommodations shouldn't cost extra. You are correct. Accommodations do not cost extra. However, If a program that you're opting into is providing beyond accommodations, they can certainly charge for that. So if you are, looking for a program for your student that has one-on-one supports, right, or has regular check-ins with a professional staff member and, let's say, job coaching and other forms of skill development, that's well outside of the scope of reasonable accommodation as defined in the college environment. And so that's where that extra cost can come in. I like to use Bridgewater State's Excel program as an example for this, because I think that, one, they do a really great job, and two, I think it's pretty clear how it works, right? So there are 3 different types of the Excel program here at Bridgewater State University. First type is the partnership program, right? And that's through the MEFA initiative, which you may be familiar with. So students are dually enrolled in both high school and college. The school district is funding the student to come to Bridgewater State University. Some of those students even live on campus, and they have the full experience that college students do while still meeting those high school curriculum guidelines, right? So that they can finish up that program. If a student finishes their high school experience without obtaining their diploma, right, so they get their completion certificate, then they might want to go into the Excel certificate program, right? So this is for students that cannot fully matriculate because they are not considered otherwise qualified in the university system for full admission into a degree-seeking program. But they might want to come to college, they might want to get all of those benefits, right? Go to the gym, be a part of the clubs, access the AAC, use a wellness center, right? But they can't fully matriculate. So that's a good option for them. Again, private pay, they're in classes and they get a ton of extra supports with that full university experience. The third version of the Excel program would be the transition program. So that would be for students who do in fact receive their diploma, right, from high school. They are interested in coming to college, but they might need supports well outside of the scope of just accommodations to help get them really transitioned in. So maybe they come for a year in the transition program and they get that extra kind of like educational coaching and stuff. And the goal for that is to really move into a fully matriculated status at the university when they're ready to do so, right? And then the other option that's outside of the Excel program for students with disabilities who want to come to BSU is fully matriculate, use our office for accommodations and all those other fun things. Same as with Sarah's school.
Okay, thinking about finding the right resources. Something we just really wanted to make sure we get across is that policies, procedures, processes, these are all going to vary from college to college. Students should be prepared to ask the Student Accessibility Services Office these questions or similar questions, to identify the right resources for them. And just remember that if you talk to one college and they do things a certain way, that's not necessarily how it's going to be at every college. So do I get an updated accommodation letter each semester? That may be different from college to college. Do I, like the student, do they give the professor their accommodation letter, or is that sent on their behalf? I know Bridgewater and Wentworth, both the students, we have the students give their accommodation letter to start that conversation to advocate for themselves. And so that's something that we do. But again, I've heard from other schools that the student is involved in that. So find out that kind of thing. Find out if students can meet remotely, if that's important to them, office hours. Some schools have different processes for requesting a housing accommodation, for example. So is that another form? Do I need different documentation? Things like that. You'd want to find out where you can work on study skills, things like that. So again, just really wanted to get the point across that, the students are going to be getting similar resources and similar accommodations, but how those are implemented is going to be different.
So that's a lot of information. Once you are done guiding your students to get hooked up with MEFA and get those ABLE accounts set up, you're going to start making sure that they are getting prepared for college in other ways, right? As a brief summary, you want to start now. The sooner, the better. There's no time too early, right? Involve them in their IEP. Help students know their diagnosis and its impact. Talk about those changes that are expected when they do come to college, and work on developing those self-advocacy skills. You want to make sure that you are helping the student to identify the right fit, right? So just because Sarah and I are here from the schools that we are here from, it doesn't mean that that's the right fit for every student. Don't tell admissions that I said that. You know, that's the same for students without disabilities, right? You've got to find the place that you feel connected to. And to do that, you want to make sure that you're exploring all of the available resources and supports and really understand all of the aspects of the student's experience that are important to them so that they can make the best informed decision about where to go. And once they've made that decision, they need to bust a move, as I like to say. They need to prepare to work with their Student Accessibility Services office. So ensuring that all of their appropriate testing and evaluations are completed, are recent, are available to the student, and submitted directly to the right place. Critical, right? Encourage your student to make direct contact with the office, whether that's an email or showing up at one of the open events for info. Anything in between, help them feel that connection, right? And understand the university's unique requirements and procedures, because as Sarah said, they can vary greatly between different institutions. So those are some solid next steps to help get towards that progress and get towards that goal of helping your students really have a successful and meaningful college experience. We're going to put our contact information up one more time, so feel free to jot this down. I know either of us are always happy to field questions, so feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.